I think you can tell a lot about a band by using an internet search engine. Take Coldplay, for example. Let's just type that name into Google and enter, and wow, 746,000 results. And look at some of the internet domains for all these different fan sites. We've got .com, .org, .net. There's .it. That's a Coldplay fan site in Italy. There's .sk. That's, what's that? Slovakia. .pl is Poland. Wow, there's actually a lot of Polish Coldplay sites. I wonder why. Okay, here's one, .br. That's Brazil. Here's a Russian one at .ru. And then, what else we got? German, Dutch, Japanese. Lyrics pages, guitar tabs, web rings. And, here's a website dedicated entirely to the song The Scientist. That's it, a whole site about one song. All right, so the world has pretty much fallen in love with Coldplay over the last couple of years. Millions of records and thousands of concert tickets sold, a big DVD, and not only is the singer dating a movie star, he's also starting to beat up photographers, which is, pretty cool. Not bad for a band that really hasn't been around all that long. I mean, Coldplay really kind of just came out of nowhere, didn't they? What's going on? Let's try and figure that out. This is the story of Coldplay.
Now, the ongoing history of new music.
Come up to meet you, tell you I'm sorry. You don't know how lovely you are. I had to find you, tell you I need you, tell you I set you apart. So tell me your secrets and ask me your questions, and now let's go back to the start. Running in circles or coming up tails, heads on the silence apart. Nobody said it was easy. Such a shame for us to part. No one ever said it would be this hard. Oh, take me back to the start. The numbers and figures, pulling your puzzles apart. The questions of science in progress, but not speak as loud as my heart. So tell me you love me, or come back home. Chasing our tails, coming back as we are. Nobody said it was easy. Oh, it's such a shame for us to part.
Coldplay, live at the Molson Amphitheater in Toronto on June 11, 2003. Hello again, I'm Alan Cross, and you gotta admit there's been some fuss about these guys over the past couple of years. I know it's only been 2 albums and 1 DVD, but, geez, look what's happened. Coldplay is one of those bands which, for whatever reason, found tons of fans almost immediately. And not only just at home in the UK, but pretty much everywhere else in the world. I mean, you got to admit that in today's musical environment, Coldplay sticks out. No detuned guitars, no hip-hop influences, no screaming singers. Hell, the singer spends most of his time at the piano, singing ballads, for God's sake. But at the same time, no one would mistake Coldplay for a bunch of rejects from American Idol. They have found this niche in today's new rock world, a niche that most old-time alt-rock fans thought had disappeared, a niche where texture and delicate dynamics and gentle melodies still exist. So no wonder people are calling Coldplay the new U2 and the new REM and the new Radiohead. So how did this happen? Even people who get Coldplay are surprised at how big they became in such a short period of time. Let's see if we can't dissect how some of this all came about. Coldplay is an offspring of the Britpop revolution of the middle 1990s. All 4 members were big fans of that golden age of British music. Chris Martin was born on June 3, 1977. His dad is an accountant, while Mom is a biology teacher. And he grew up in Devonshire, which is in the southwest of England. And here's a really odd fact about Chris's family. His great-great-grandfather was the guy who convinced the British Parliament to introduce daylight savings time in Britain. This was May 1916. His name was William Willett. You can look it up. Growing up, Chris played in a bunch of different bands with names like the Rockin' Honkies and the Red Rooster Boogie Band. For a while, he was in a techno-pop-ish group called Identity Crisis. They weren't very good and were sometimes booed off stage. Chris also went through a period of time in his teens where he thought he might be gay. Then there's guitarist John Buckland. He's Welsh by birth, and in his family, Dad was the biology teacher. His mom was a music teacher, and he was in a bunch of different groups growing up, including a rap act and a metal band. Seriously. Will Champion is the band's drummer. He's originally from Southampton, and at one time, both his parents were music teachers. The only high school band anybody remembers with him was called Fat Hamster. And finally, there's bass player Guy Berryman. He grew up in Fife, Scotland, and his high school band was Time Out, and they spent all their time trying to learn Genesis songs. In the middle 1990s, all 4 guys found themselves at University College in London. Chris enrolled in ancient history. Guy got into engineering so he could learn to be an architect like his dad. Will studied anthropology like his father did when he was in school, and John opted for astronomy and mathematics. The first 2 guys to meet were John and Chris. It was Frosh Week, 1996, and they were in the student residence playing pool. They spent the rest of the school year trying to come up with a plan for a band. And get this, Chris thought their best chance was to create some kind of boy band like NSYNC. He even had a name for them, Pectorals. There's a dark Coldplay secret. Eventually, they ran into Guy, who somehow convinced them that he should be part of their project, whatever it might turn out to be. Will came along a few years later when Chris, John, and Guy were stuck for a permanent drummer. They had somebody keeping time for him, but he didn't think the original songs they were writing were any good, so he quit. Wonder where that guy is now. Will was actually a guitar player, but when the drummer decided he'd rather head down to the pub rather than rehearse, Will was drafted into playing drums. And from that day on, January 6, 1998, he became Coldplay's drummer. And then there's that name, Coldplay. Where did that come from? Actually, the band borrowed it from another student who had been using it for his group. But he didn't want it anymore because he found it too depressing and he didn't think he'd have any success with it. Had he not given up that name, Coldplay might have been called Starfish or Stepney Green. The first official Coldplay song was something called Ode to Deodorant. Another dark Coldplay secret. Don't bother looking for it anywhere because they wrote it as a joke. I don't think they ever recorded it anywhere. The first official Coldplay gig was held at a pub in Camden in the spring of 1998, and the first official Coldplay recording took place at around the same time. They spent about £1,500 on 3 tracks that would show up in what they would call the Safety EP. They had no record deal and no way of actually distributing the record. All they could afford to do is print up 500 copies and give them away to friends. Needless to say, original copies of the Safety EP now trade for hundreds of dollars. And here's a sample. Released in May 1998, this is Coldplay with Bigger, Stronger.
I wanna be bigger, stronger, drive a faster car. Take me anywhere in seconds. Take me anywhere I wanna go and drive around a faster car. I will settle for nothing less. I will settle for nothing less. I wanna be big, stronger, drive a faster car. At the touch of a button, I can go anywhere I wanna go and drive around my faster car. I will settle for nothing less. I will settle for nothing less. I think I wanna change my attitude. I think I wanna change my position. I think I wanna change my
Not bad for a bunch of Ponzi schoolboys, including a singer that was still wearing braces, huh? That's the earliest Coldplay we can find, Bigger, Stronger, from the Safety EP back in the spring of 1998. Coldplay continued to play whatever gigs they could get through the rest of the year, and a lot of them were disasters. People just did not get what the band was trying to do. That all changed on December 7th, 1998. They were playing another show in Camden when a guy from a small indie label called Fierce Panda approached them with an offer to release a single. So it was back into the studio. The result was another 3-song EP that came out in April 1999. Only 2,500 copies were pressed, so once again we have another Coldplay collector's item. The lead track was called Brothers and Sisters, and it sounded like this.
time of your lives. Break down, gotta spread love around, gotta spread it around. Brothers and sisters, feel fine. It's the time of your lives. It's the time of your lives. There's no sound like this feeling you found, like this feeling you found. But just stay down. Brothers and sisters, unite. It's the time of your lives. It's the time of your lives. Break down. Gotta spread love around. Gotta spread it all around. But just stay down. Sometimes you'll
Coldplay with the title track of their Brothers and Sisters EP from April 1999. That EP was enough to convince a scout at EMI Records to come calling. And as soon as everyone finished their final university exams in June 1999, Coldplay signed their major record deal. And then that summer, they recorded another EP, this time with the title The Blue Room. Now, there was a lot of tension and pressure during these sessions, and Will actually walked out for a week. And Chris, a non-smoker and non-drinker, responded by getting blind drunk. He hasn't had a drink since, by the way. In the end, though, things were worked out, but not before a few rules were laid down. Number one, the band was declared a democracy. Everything, including all the profits, no matter who wrote the songs or how they were written, would be split 4 ways, just like they do in U2 and REM. And number two, anyone caught using cocaine, under any circumstances, would be immediately dismissed from the group. 5 songs were finished for the Blue Room EP. Here's one of them. This is called Don't Panic.
Bones sinking like stones, all that we fall for. Homes, places we've grown, all of us are done for. We live in a somebody to lean on.
Coldplay and the original version of Don't Panic from 1999. 5,000 copies of this EP were released, and they sold reasonably well. Things were at least getting incrementally better. The band spent the rest of 1999 playing as many gigs as they could. Things were going okay, but no one could have guessed where Coldplay was going to be just 12 months later, thanks to a song that had been thrown away 2 years earlier. More after this.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
Through 3 EPs on 3 different labels, Coldplay hadn't even come close to having any kind of a hit song. They were still the Ponce University boys. The record label was a little concerned because they thought the Blue Room EP was kind of, well, flat. It was definitely time for a hit single. That's when Coldplay trotted out a 2-year-old song that Chris Martin had wrote when he was in a particularly glum mood. And in October 1999, it was released as the lead track on yet another EP. In case you're counting, this is EP number 4. It was called Shiver.
So I look in your direction, but you pay me no attention, do you? I know you don't listen to me, 'cause you say you see straight through me, don't you? But on and on, from the moment I wake to the moment I sleep, I'll be there by your side. Just you try and stop me, I'll be waiting in line just to see if you can. Oh, did you want me to change? Well, I changed for good, and I want you to know that you'll always get your way. And I wanted to say, don't you shiver? You shiver. Sing it out. I'll always be waiting for you. So you know how much I need you, but you never even see me, do you? And is this my final chance of getting but on and on, from the moment I wake to the moment I sleep, I'll be there by your side. Just you try and stop me, I'll be waiting in line just to see if you can. So I look in your direction, but you pay me no attention. And you know how much I need you, but you never even see me.
Shiver from the fall of 1999 and Coldplay's first hit single in the UK. Okay, so it only made it to number 35, but it was a start. And at least it got more people to pay attention, and it landed them some British TV gigs. On one of those appearances in May 2000, Coldplay performed a new song that Chris had written while sitting outside one night. It was a depressing sort of song that just happens to be in a major key, the kind of thing that Radiohead is so good at. The video helped, too. It had this unique minimalist feel, featuring Chris walking down the beach in the rain. That, however, was an accident. The rain was awful that day, so they shot what they could in just 20 minutes and went home. And the reason Chris is all by himself in the clip is because Will's mum had died, and the video shoot was scheduled for the same day as the funeral. The result was a number 4 hit in the UK and the beginnings of a worldwide reputation. From the summer of 2000, this is Coldplay with Yellow.
Across for you. Oh, what a thing to do. 'Cause you were all yellow. I drew a line for you. Oh, what a thing to do. And it was all yellow. Something beautiful, and you know, for you I bleed myself dry. For you I bleed myself dry. Shine for you. Look how they shine for you. Look how they shine for you. Look how they shine. Look at the stars. Look how they shine for you. And all the things that you do.
Coldplay had no clue that song would become so huge so quickly. It became something of a worldwide anthem throughout the summer and the fall of 2000. And when Coldplay's first proper album, after 4 warm-up EPs and just 32 months together, things just exploded. The CD came out on July 10th, 2000. It had been recorded between gigs and tours over the last 9 months. They had a bunch of titles for it. There's Don't Panic. That was a favorite for a while. They thought about Yellow, but given the success of the single, that might have been a bit too obvious. Help Is Around the Corner sounded all right, but just a bit, desperate. In the end, they ended up going with Parachutes. Why? It's a metaphorical thing. Since Coldplay had a rep as being miserable, they wanted to offer a bit of optimism. When you're falling fast, a parachute is something that will bring you gently to earth. Or something like that. Whatever.
A spider web is tangled up with me, and I lost my head and thought of all the stupid things I'd said. Spider web and I'm caught in the middle, so I turned to run and thought of all the stupid things I'd done. And I never meant to cause you trouble, and I never meant to do you wrong. Meant to do you harm. Oh no, I see spider web and it's me in the middle. So I twist and turn, but here am I in my little bubble, singing out, I never meant to cause you trouble, and I never meant to do you wrong, and well, if I ever caused you trouble, to do you harm. They spun a web for me. They spun a web for me. They spun a web for me.
There's still some debate about how and why Coldplay and Parachutes became as big as they did. They sold 20,000 copies in week 1 and another 40,000 copies in week 2. And by Christmas of 2000, it had sold 1.6 million in Britain alone. Now, that was a real surprise because the label had set a target of 40,000 total. Worldwide sales topped out somewhere north of 5 million. What happened? In Britain, they were actually part of a phase of light-sounding pop bands that were all having tremendous success at home. There was Travis and the Doves and JJ72 and Muse and a few others. But what about the rest of the world, which was big into distorted guitars and wild computer-generated DJ mixes? And they didn't seem to drink or do drugs or party in the traditional rock and roll sense. But maybe that's why Coldplay did well. They were so different from what was going on everywhere else in music, they provided a nice alternative to the Linkin Parks and Limp Bizkits of the world. Parachutes won all kinds of awards from all kinds of organizations from all over the world. You couldn't ask for a better performance. Nice job. Way to go. Good record. Now what's next? Okay. More in a second.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
In less than 3 years, Coldplay had gone from a bunch of anonymous British students to one of the best-selling acts in the world, and it was a little weird. While the band was in Los Angeles, Sylvester Stallone came up to them and said, "Hey, I want to use the song Trouble in one of my movies." Diet Coke asked to use the same song in a TV commercial, and then the people who make Gatorade were rumored to have offered about 9 million Canadian dollars to use Yellow in one of their Gatorade commercials. That's a ton of money, but in every case, Coldplay said no. Charity cases, okay. Corporate commercials, no. You say, what about that ABC television campaign? Different story. Under the music licensing rules in the United States, TV networks don't have to ask for permission to use songs when it comes to promos. So ABC just went ahead and used the song. They didn't have to ask for permission. Now, about that second album. Coldplay began work on their second CD in October 2001, pretty much without a break, following everything that came with the Parachutes album. The problem was that Chris hadn't written anything in months. And that's when he pulled out something he had been working on 2 years earlier. His old demo tape was dusted off and re-recorded, and once it was down on tape, more new ideas began to spring forth. And this old song, inspired by an old Procol Harum song called A Whiter Shade of Pale, eventually became the first single of an album called A Rush of Blood to the Head. It was released While Chris Martin was recording the vocals, Ian McCullough of Echo and the Bunnymen was sitting on a stool right beside him, right there in the vocal booth, drinking red wine. Ian had been invited into the sessions as sort of an unofficial consultant, a seasoned vet to sort of help a young band through the process of making that difficult second album. One rumor says that they used about 1,000 hours of studio time to get this record done. A Rush of Blood to the Head finally came out on August 27, 2002, and we have time for one more song before we wrap up, and this is a track that almost didn't make the album. The band didn't like it, but their manager convinced them that leaving it out would be a big mistake. Think he was right?
Lights go out and I can't be saved. Tides that I tried to swim against brought me down upon my knees. Oh, I beg and plead, singing, come out of things unsaid. Shouldn't I fall off my head? And a trouble that can't be named. A tiger's waiting to be tamed, singing. Confusion never stops, closing walls and ticking clocks. Gonna come back and take you home. I could not stop the tune now, no, singing. Come out upon my seas, curse missed opportunities. Am I a part of the cure, or am I part of the disease? Singing. Nothing else compares. Oh, nothing else compares. Nothing else compares.
So that's a quick history lesson on Coldplay. Back with a few final things in a moment.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
Here in North America, we've been burned by countless next big thing bands from the UK. But occasionally, a group lives up to the hype. Oasis, Radiohead, and now Coldplay. Nearly 10 million records sold by a rock band who doesn't drink or do drugs or use loud guitars or hip-hop beats. In other words, a rock band that doesn't rock. In the usual sense, I mean. Coldplay should be around for a while, too, because their first contract calls for 5 albums, and they've only released 2 full records. Even if the band does explode, Chris Martin's love relationships with actress Gwyneth Paltrow will keep him in the tabloids. She has friends in all kinds of high places. She hangs around with Paul McCartney's daughters and has access to some pretty exclusive circles. And although this means absolutely nothing, I'll just throw it in. She's 5 years older than Chris. A lot has happened to the guys in Coldplay in an extremely short period of time. They've gone from being a bunch of unknown schoolboys to selling out venues like the Molson Amphitheater and Madison Square Garden. That's up to 20,000 people at a shot. It'll be interesting to see if they can keep it together. We wish them well. Technical production for this show is by Rob Johnston. All email can go to ongoinghistory@kojiko.ca. I'm Alan Cross.
You've been listening to The Ongoing History of New Music, a Deep Sky production.